think I'm gonna have to keep that music going, like so that we can keep dancing, like after it's done. That's a lot of fun. I love doing that intro. Uh,
I love it.
so, welcome to Conservatism on Tap. I'm your host Wes Seiler, and this is my brother John. So it's great, man. It's good to see you. And normally we have like 3 or 4 folks that are on the show, so it's awesome to have just me and you on here, so we can catch up, John. We'll talk about some
Yeah,
conservatism, talk about the weeks that we've had, some of the issues. I just came off of a show having a libertarian, a liberal, and myself as the conservative having a very positive and frank discussion about abortion, which I thought was amazing. Like it can happen. It can totally happen. We were talking about with Chris how he actually envisions a world where abortion doesn't occur, where it's unneeded, it's unnecessary, and how he was in favor of that and would love to see that. I'm like, dude, that's something I can get behind, as opposed
well, I
to
think that
more
shows you a perspective. That shows you a perspective of a liberal who, I guess as you read a lot of writings and news articles from the right, you think that anyone who's a liberal, like, not only wants there to be abortion, they love it. They absolutely love the idea of it.
yeah.
And to hear Chris say that was that, to hear say the opposite was actually very enlightening to me.
Yeah, I'm throwing some whiskey here. I got some single barrel select Jack Daniels that I'm throwing in my coffee right now.
Yeah,
But yeah, you're totally right. Like I was, because he said at one point he was talking about how he doesn't know anybody, he doesn't interact with anybody who actually like loves and celebrates abortion. And I pointed out that there are movements that do that, the shout your abortion, hashtags and stuff like that, or make
yeah.
it normal, celebrate it. And I was like, dude, that does exist. And he was like, yeah, that's not me. That's not me. And there's a whole lot of liberals that are not like that. And you're totally right. But the other thing is we can figure out ways to be able to find common ground on this issue. But there's such a divide, in this country. There's so many politicians who've gotten into office. Everything about them is terrible, but you know what? We agree with them because they're pro-life. Like
Yeah.
the issue is like the dividing issue, and I want to believe that when someone is pro-life and they've done work towards it, okay, that they're a good person because I agree with them on that issue. But I also think about how many politicians would not be in office if this wasn't a thing. Like if this wasn't the dividing cultural line of our time.
Oh,
Like,
I've had so many conversations with people who usually identify as like Republican, and they say, honestly, the only reason I'm voting for this person right now, I know this person is sleazy, or I know this person like rubs me the wrong way, or I don't agree with their morals, except for the fact that they're pro-life. And otherwise, I would vote Democrat, as if like that is the single issue that matters above all. So I think you're right, Wes. I think that people do end up getting into office on that almost that one issue.
which
Alone.
means that there is an incentive to keep us divided, right? There is an incentive to keep it that way, because there's all these people who have jobs because of the divide, and I believe that there's a portion of them, and maybe it's not that big, I don't know, but I believe that there's a portion of them that are like, we have to portray every single liberal as extremists celebrating abortions, all this stuff, and then on the liberal side, I think there's all these people that are like, we have to portray every single conservative, every single pro-lifer, as if they hate women, as if they just
Right.
don't care at all about taking care of single moms and helping them out. And like, this is absolutely absurd. But when there's money to be made, when there's jobs to be had, when there is a war, then there is always people who are making money selling bullets. Like, right? Like,
Yeah, it's terrible. I mean, even on VCU campus, I mean, you can see the divide happen when there's people who come in that usually are far leaning right, and they're bringing out this whole presentation and showing you very graphic images, related to abortion and talking about how like it's evil and it's wrong. And of course, you got the other side that has their own presentations about women's rights, and like they just clash as if there's no common ground, as if nobody's there being like, can we not value women's rights and also have a hard discussion about like life in the womb? Can we not do that? And they literally, like, they've had to move. They were banned away from campus because of how much disruption they cause. And it would still be going on if they weren't banned.
Here's the common ground, right? The common ground between liberals and conservatives on abortions is, can we get to a point where we don't need that, right? Like where there are other options, where women are not in that situation, families are not in that situation through education, adoption, you know, contraceptive, whatever, right? Like there's all these different options that they have, so they're not put in this terrible spot, right? If we can
Hmm.
get to that point where our goal is the same, if liberals say our goal is to have abortions decrease to the point that they barely exist, and if
Yeah.
conservatives can say the same thing, then we both agree on the end state. That's progress. That's progress. Because right now, the end state is to just like defend Roe v. Wade until the death, right? And then on the conservative side, it's like get every pro-choice person out of there, right? There's these,
Hmm.
which is unrealistic. It's unrealistic. It's never going to happen, not anytime soon, anyway. But if we can agree on the end state, now it's just a matter of how do we get there. And
Yeah.
conservatives, some of them would say, "Hey, the legal measures need to happen," which I agree with. I love to see like legal advances. I post them on our page all the time. And a lot of Democrats and liberals, I think, would say legal is only part of it. We also need to look at how are we taking care of the least of us, right? In which case,
Hmm.
I would point you to like churches, right? Like good churches
That's
where,
what I was thinking too. Is that how amazing would it be for churches to have educational programs that are related to that,
right,
and not just biblical education programs.
right, right. If
Yeah.
you can have a church where it says, hey, listen, if you're in this difficult situation, then we want to come alongside you. We want to help you. We want to give you access to services. We want to coordinate with adoption agencies. We want to make sure that you have food to eat. If you do decide to keep this child, that you're going to have a family, right? Like we're
Hmm.
going to help you with childcare and everything else. You can still work a job, right? Like
Hmm.
that's the kind of church I go to, right? And I know it's the kind of church
Yeah.
I go to. Like if we can have that type of discussion, then all of a sudden these big terrible conservatives who are out there just like what they say about us is completely like undone. And then the
Yeah.
same thing is we start to connect with people who are going through tough times, who are like being fed all kinds of lies by Planned Parenthood or whatever. And we cut through some of that stuff and say, no, you do have options. You definitely have options besides this. You should.
Yeah.
Right. So
I think the church.
it's fun to have that debate. It's fun to have that discussion with a libertarian, a liberal, a conservative. And someone says to me, "Hey, you can't have a adult conversation about abortion with people who disagree." I would like point them to that episode. Like, watch it right now. I
Yeah.
literally
Well,
did.
and it needs to be like those episodes need to be a preview of what could be.
Yeah.
You know, like when you're talking about a church hosting that kind of programming for people who are thinking about having an abortion or who have already had one, or for any other all these other situations, like that is a safe and secure space for people of different minds to come together and to find what they can agree on, because they can't do it on social media, right? It's completely divided, right? They're not going to be doing that in schools very often. I mean, it's whether the curriculum is already agenda focused, but like you see divides on school campuses all the time.
Yeah.
So I think that there isn't a physical safe space often enough for these people to gather together to be able to talk about these differences. Often enough, churches, that I've seen locally are usually catering to their own,
Yeah.
which is really bad, and not to the least of these. And so that's what I want to see more of, is that community focus, right? The local focus, which I've seen some of your work with Navarre. I saw you running the 5K and
Oh yeah. We have to
talking
put up some
about like
pictures.
the other things that have been going on there. And I'm extremely, extremely excited to hear about that. That looked awesome, by the way.
Yeah. Yeah. You know, yeah. When you talk about these things and you bring them up, yeah, it's a conversation that needs to continue happening, and it does.
Well, I
It
like,
needs to be personal. It needs to be local, right? And
yeah,
and you need to put actions behind your words. You need to be out there like assisting people with this. I mean, otherwise, like you have no right to speak on it. And I think that's the point. It's like we need to get to if we as conservatives care, then we need to go out there and show that we care. And if liberals care, then they need to do the same, right? But
right.
that's
And
that's not
sometimes
what
it's,
sells today, right?
yeah. And since it's not just like the government or political organizations or even health organizations that are going to solve all the problems, let me give you an example. Like you were talking about like the right to life and how complicated that is in securing. We can only secure the right to life to a certain extent. You can't. The government can't protect your child from crossing the street necessarily and getting hit by a car. And I was thinking, I couldn't help but think about my daughter who has type 1 diabetes at the age of 2. Right now, sure, like we can provide as much technology as possible that's FDA approved, like an insulin pump that's going to give her insulin every time that she's eating and throughout her day, because type 1 diabetes is an autoimmune disease. But we're just now going to be getting her on what's called the looping system, which is not FDA approved, right? No one has really done it for great success officially, but there have been people who are programmers, software engineers, hardware engineers, and they've come together through community forums, and most of them have either been affected by type 1 diabetes personally in some way, or their family has, and they've created a looping system with various insulin pumps and things like that. And so it's just interesting how the security to life is locally based. It's like a grassroots thing that has come up where people have said, no more do I want to have to deal with diabetes and having to deal with lows at night and possibly dying in the middle of my sleep. I want to be able to have a system that is automated, that can actually, is as close to an artificial pancreas as possible. And it's fascinating how that has come from local people, local volunteers, local people who say, my child has a right to life and I'm going to secure it. I'm going to create that with a team of individuals who are also as passionate as I am about that. And it's not coming from, say any mainstream company or anything like that. That's probably going to be years down the road, especially now that COVID has probably set that back quite a bit.
Yeah.
So it's fascinating to see the local community come together to help push that forward.
Yeah, that's one of the things, and I think I'll do like a Wednesday show on this, because we brought it up in the discussion in the last show, and we'll talk about it now, is this notion of a right to life, right? Is everybody loves that. I love it, right? We all love the notion of everyone is entitled to life. We all have this starting point. We live, and then things happen, and we make choices. It's also not true. Like, it's also not a description of reality. Right?
Exactly.
In the American context, we're so indoctrinated with it that we can't perceive of anything else. But it's not entirely true, because life, as you said, has to be secured. And we're not always successful in that. And that's kind of a harsh reality that hits us, that makes the abortion debate and so many others so difficult, is we act like this John Locke narrative of everybody is given life, and then God says, go out there and knock yourself out, is the starting point. That's not how it happens. Some people are born into lives of privilege. Some people barely survive. Some people, like your daughter, it's through all this medical technology and these people coming together to help her get the same chance at life that so many other people have naturally, right?
Yeah.
It's beautiful. It's this beautiful thing. But life is not something that we're just handed. It is this great mystery, and that's what Burke talks about. Is Burke has entire books discussing the mystery of life and how it's not this entitlement. It is this thing that for some people lasts 40 years. For some people it's 4, right? Like, some people live a full life and make it to 100. Some people don't get a chance at that, and yet life can still be beautiful even in, the short time versus the long time, right? It's a mystery to us. And so when we buy into the Jeffersonian notion of the right to life, and we don't even think about it, right? We just say, yep, that explains everything. Kind of. Burke calls us to question it. He's like, really? Really? Because it kind of leads you to this expectation, like, I have a right to life, and if anybody takes anything away from it, then they're bad. And Kyle and I were talking about that, is have you read the Bible? Because there's a lot of times when God takes the right to life away from people, right? Noah,
that's extremely controversial.
Stories where God's like, no, you don't. Like, your right to life is taken. Also, like Joshua, like, go nuts. Like, there's these times where that narrative of Jefferson is directly contradicted by religion and just reality again, and just the fact that things happen to people. And it immediately causes this sense of like sadness and dismay and frustration as we hit reality, and we realize, like, hey, my rights have been violated. Your rights are always violated. Like, a much more realistic notion is to say, like, the life is something that we should always pursue, right? It's not this entitlement right given to us. Life is something that we should chase after and protect, and that's like what's so beautiful about your family situation, and right, and this abortion debate. is that life is a gift. Life, and as opposed to a right. Life is a gift. It's this precious gift that is given and sometimes is taken away. And because it's so temporary, because it's so precious, we should always try to secure it wherever we can. And that's why I'm pro-life personally. It's not
Right. Yeah. I think that
lock
you
it.
hit the nail on the head with, the idea of pursuing life and,
Yeah,
and protecting it as much as we can. To make it personal, I recall, Wes, that you had to spend some time, with your children, like in the NICU. And I
yeah,
remember when Ruby was, possibly coming early, like many weeks early, that you had called me and said, like, hey, if you're going to be spending some time in the NICU with your kid, it can get rough. And I'm there to help you through that. And I just recalled that kind of relief, but also that sense of life is beautiful, and it can be scary to see life threatened at such a young age. With my oldest daughter with type 1 diabetes, with Ruby possibly being born early, like there was that very clear reality that like my children might not last more than 2 years, even though I've done everything
tough.
right, even though I've done everything that I was supposed to do. Like life just happened, and sometimes life just dies or gets extremely threatened. And yet you, Wes, were able to help me through in the midst of it, find meaning in the mystery that sometimes that life, whether it's short or long, isn't insignificant, no matter how short or long it is, right? It all finds its purpose and its place in God. And I don't mean say God's plan as
Yeah,
to say of like he had a plan and a purpose for this to teach you X, Y, or Z. It's not that. It's
yeah,
always the end result is always him. And that was what was very, very meaningful to me, during those very hectic moments and those very, very scary, scary moments.
yeah,
So when you talk about like the right to life, or when you talk about like say being pro-life, like those are the thoughts that come to mind on a personal level
yeah,
of life can be long, life can be short. We always want to pursue life and to keep it going for as long as possible. But there is that value in it, no matter how long it exists, that is always found in something that's in providence and something much greater than yourself, and in a love and compassion that's greater.
yeah. That's
Um,
where
yeah.
we set ourselves up for a lot of struggle and a lot of confusion from the very beginning. Is when we adopt notions that life has been given to us as a right, right? We adopt the humanistic notions, the secular notions of a Thomas Jefferson. We say, "Yep, that explains it." Okay, I have a right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Given those things, I should have those things. And then, if I, some people they make choices, they kill somebody, whatever, they lose their rights because now they're in prison for the rest of their life, right? It makes sense. Okay, justice, got it. You messed it up. What about people who don't? What about people who don't do this horrible thing, and yet they contract some disease and they don't live their full life? All of a sudden, we're really upset at God. Really, you
Yeah.
violated the contract. What about the social contract, God? Didn't you read John Locke, right?
This guy wrote.
Thomas
Didn't you
Jefferson said, right? Like we get really upset. God extinguished. Did God not listen to the Constitution? You know, I have this. I have my rights, God. I have my rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And then God violated them by not giving me the life that I wanted or extinguishing my life before. So that is not the notion, right? That you get. That is
Mhm.
not the narrative that you get. Instead, if you take each day is a gift. It's not a
That's
right,
right. Yeah.
not entitlement. It's not anything. Each day is a gift given by God, and He can choose to take it away at any time. Right?
Hmm.
If you adopt that notion, then when those trials come, it's still painful. It's still hard. Like, and I don't want to like take that away or belittle anybody
Exactly.
been through tough times because we have, but it's still hard. It's still painful. But your immediate notion is you go back to your worldview and you're like, yeah, this makes sense. God's going to allow pain. I knew that from the beginning, and I don't have this indignation through it. I immediately go and trust Him and lean on Him, right? Because He's the giver of life from the beginning, and it's not mine. I quoted
Mhm.
Jeremiah on the show the other day, which says that a man's life is not his own. It is up to the Lord to direct his steps, which is a direct contradiction of Thomas Jefferson. Okay? But Jeremiah says, hey, it's up to God on this thing. And maybe God wanted you to live long, maybe He didn't. And when we start to adopt that notion, we kind of like we take the American worldview into overdrive and we complete it. We add another mysterious notion to it and a little less, of ourselves. Which is not to be. I'm not. It may sound like I'm making fun of the founding fathers, but I do cherish them and I do respect them. They were living in a time where there was an oppressor in Great Britain
Exactly.
to come after them, and so that was helpful language for them. And I get it. It was helpful at the time, but it didn't tell the complete story.
Right. It's good to balance that narrative of, the founding fathers with also a narrative of, like you said, biblical truth of life is a gift, and you should be thankful for the time that you have been given. So like, yes, there was, a time to rise up and to demand, hey, in order to preserve life, in order to, persevere in life and to thrive, like this needs to happen and we need to claim this. But before God, and before like, every day in your life, it really should be a kneeling down before Providence and just saying, I'm alive, I am healthy today. And this is, you should not take that for granted. You are not owed that by any divine being. So I think there's that balance of narrative that is extremely useful, but also often forgotten. Right. But I hate to say that it's only when you have a health scare that you kind of you get to that, but I can definitely tell you that at least from my experience, like I've been, our family's been relatively healthy for many years, but when this occurred in my family, like type 1 diabetes, it was all of a sudden you're thankful for every moment that you have.
That's right. Yeah.
You are. And for those who have undergone suffering, like that's not to belittle it at all, but the hope is that in that suffering, you have years or many days worth of gratitude to be able to bank on, to be able to handle that, and to be able to still live in a state of joy, even after tragedy.
What's really cool is for people when people discover that, and you see it in movies, you see it in books, you see it timed. And I don't think people realize fully like what's happening, when they're discovering that notion. Maybe they do. I don't know, but it's beautiful when people start to change their worldview and complete it, and they start to say, "Oh, now I'm getting suddenly I'm much more happy." You would think that you would become more callous if you gave up this notion that I'm entitled to life, and that you'd be like, "Okay, it's not my life. I don't care about it anymore." But the opposite occurs, in that when you start to give that up and you live for other people, you live for the sake of of God, and you're thankful for each day, or you're dependent on Him for each day. All of a sudden, I think you actually start to like go into the grain of reality a little bit more. If that's the natural law, that's the state of affairs as it's truly occurring, and then all of a sudden, there's chances to be able to further secure and protect life all over the place. And you feel a need to do that because if it's not an entitlement, then it requires some level of work, and it's much more cheerful work because what you're doing is just trying to further this as best you can, as opposed to protecting something that's being destroyed, right?
Yeah.
Like because if your goal is to decrease or eliminate all infringements on the right to life, like you're going to fail.
Yeah, possible.
If you get rid of all the Democrats, you're still going to fail. Like it's going to happen, right? It's that's a journey that's very like dismal, and like ultimately, it's going to come for you too. Like dust shine on us all,
I think
right?
it's important just to be reminded of like the things that are bigger than yourself. I mean, if religious orientation isn't your cup of tea, you can at least go out and like look at the stars. You can go out, find a sunset, or sunrise that you enjoy. I mean, just having those moments of beauty are really striking to be able to take into like I guess that kind of a sense of thankfulness, for who you are and for where you have come, and then the gift of life that you've been given. And I'll definitely put this in there because Josh and Cal aren't here, but Lord of the Rings, the movies suck on this front, where it's supposed to be a beautiful story. They are beautiful narratives and they're beautiful locations. And the movie tries to do that, but it gets overshadowed by all the gore and the grittiness and the battles that Peter Jackson likes to throw in it. I had to put that in there. But I think being reminded of beauty whether that's reading the Lord of the Rings, reading your, one of your favorite stories, finding a movie that is a beautiful narrative to you, or a landscape that is beautiful, or a moment or an act of kindness, like all those things, I think work towards what we're talking about, Wes, which is this sense of joy and of gratitude and thankfulness, which I think is the first step towards acknowledging this inherited life, or this gift of life that we've been given.
Yeah, yeah. I was thinking about it doesn't even have to be a Christian, right? Even if you're not a Christian, it'll be appealing. I was thinking about Gladiator, and like the end of Gladiator is like the guy Maximus is his friend, right? He's dusting off the little soldiers in the ground, and he's talking about how we'll see each other again, but not yet, not yet, right? Like we're no longer we're no longer afraid of death, right? We're at a point where we've got some work to do, but we're going to cherish it, and we're going to try to honor people's legacy, and enjoy our lives with the time that we've been given. I think that's that's a narrative that America needs to start to consider, and I think it will make us less hostile for each other and less angry, and it will appeal to so many more people, which is what you see in our shows when we start to have liberals and libertarians being able to dissect one of the darkest issues of our country, and to do so and have a good time doing it, and to come up with all kinds of solutions
and learn some new views, learn some new nuanced views that people have that aren't just cookie cutter, hate on the other side answers. I love that. I mean, I love that we're getting more nuance there. It's awesome.
So, it's fun. It was a great show. So, and I'm grateful for that chance to kind of reflect on it here as well with you and all that stuff. So, I do look forward to having Josh and Cal hopefully back in a couple weeks. This project has been a lot of fun doing Conservatism on Tap. I think we've got some big developments coming, which I'm going to be excited to talk about. But if there's more topics that you want us to get into, just let us know on our website, theberkinconservative.com. You can sign up on there to get updates and see our topics before they come out. Facebook page, The Berkin Conservative, Twitter, Instagram. We're on all that stuff, so you can message us on there. We love interacting with you, so send us some comments, some ideas for shows. We'll be happy to do that. John, thank you so much for being here, for helping me kind of wade through these deep waters, and I'll see you next week, buddy.
Cheers, man. See you.